Okay, shall we start? We're at 40 participants, so it seems to be a good number to begin. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the SOAS Festival of Ideas. If you haven't logged on to any of our events yet, so I'm welcoming you back again. My name is Amina Yakin. I'm the director of the SOAS Festival of Ideas and the chair of the Decolonizing Working Group and chair of the Center for the Study of Pakistan. It gives me to chair this particular session gives me a lot of pleasure in terms of my research interests, my admiration for the particular film, and the fact that this is a masterclass as well. So I've been looking forward to this with great anticipation. I my job really is that of a moderator, so I will be not speaking very much. I will literally be introducing the two central people for the masterclass and handing you over to them, and I'll let you know a little bit about the format. And so this film masterclass is going to be called Zinda Bhaag, Form and the Assemblage of Form and Reflexivity. And it will be discussed in the context of decolonizing knowledge via the film's use of particular types of storytelling techniques. And it's divided, the masterclass is divided into two parts, with the first part where you'll have a knowledge exchange session with Professor Iftikhar Dadi, who is joining us, and he's to give you an introduction. He's an associate professor in Cornell's University Department of History of Art. He has authored Modernism and the Art of Muslim South Asia and co-edited Lines of Control, Partition as a Productive Space, and Unpacking Europe Towards a Critical Reading. He serves on the editorial advisory boards of Bioscope, South Asian Screen Studies, Archives of Asian Art, and Art Journal, and is an advisor to Asia Art Archive. As an artist, he works collaboratively with Elizabeth Dadi. Their practice investigates memory, borders, and identity in contemporary globalization, the productive capacities of urban informalities in the global south, and the mass culture of post-industrial societies. Welcome, Professor Dadi. I'm very grateful to you for joining us, and I know it's particularly early where you are. So we are doubly grateful to you for being on board. And of course, the other central person in this masterclass is the director herself of the film Zinda Bhaag, which was released in 2013 and remains one of the most successful films of the Pakistani, India joint kind of film industries in South Asia. I think the collaboration, Meenu can tell you more in terms of its background. But it's we are also in this Festival of Ideas looking to our SOAS alums for the inspiring work that they do, for the amazing inspirations that they bring us through their work. So it's wonderful, Meenu, to have you back with us and to have you as a SOAS alum and as a very successful director. Meenu's films have been theatrically released in the UK, USA, UAE, Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and the VOD platforms like Netflix and Amazon. She's truly a global director. Her films have received 14 international awards. Her debut fiction feature as writer-director was an entry to the foreign film category at the Oscars and screened as part of leading film festivals and universities worldwide. Meenu's current feature in development has been part of the Locarno International Film Festival's Open Doors program and the Berlinale Talent Campus and the NIPCO film program in Berlin, supported by Berlinale and Median Board. She has received several grants for her documentary films, including the Jan Riemann Fund. And lastly, but something that I've already given an indication of, Meenu completed a PhD in film studies from SOAS and presently teaches at the Tisch program at NYU London. Welcome, Meenu. Thank you for joining us. The format of the session is going to be that Iftikhar is going to take you for the first hour, I think. Am I right? And then we will have a Q&A session. The audience members are asked to put their questions in the Q&A that shows up at the bottom of your screens on the Zoom. And then we will pick up the questions for half an hour between 12 and 12:30. And then Meenu will do a practice and exercise relating to storytelling and her work. So thank you both, and I will hand you over to Iftikhar.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Amina, and to SOAS for the invitation to have this masterclass. And it's a real pleasure to have a chance to speak with Meenu and to talk about Zinda Bhaag. So this is a masterclass, although, I mean, masterclass is somewhat of a you know, in the sense you won't learn everything in one class about the film, okay? So masterclass is not going to be really a masterclass in that sense. But I think it's a film that I don't know how many people have already watched. It certainly bears watching. It is in the SOAS library, apparently. And but today we'll talk, so we'll show some clips of Zinda Bhaag, but we'll also talk about its making and its kind of, in a sense, both questions of its form, right, the way it's put together, but also in terms of what it does to activate various, to kind of, in a sense, touch upon and activate various kind of lineages, right? And one lineage would be actually the history of cinema in South Asia. The kind of the older history of cinema in South Asia. Zinda Bhaag is from 2013, but in a way it's constantly also referring back to other to the rich cinematic past of South Asia. So that's one thing we could talk about, and certainly we have we have Meenu here, so this is a good chance for us to also get firsthand kind of insights into the making of the film. So, so what I want to do is just sketch out briefly the background, in Pakistan to cinema. So in Pakistan, so Pakistan started to Lahore even before the partition, before 1947, was an important center of filmmaking, and it was smaller than Bombay, but nevertheless it produced some important films. There was also a lot of connection between Lahore and Bombay in terms of people going back and forth. A lot of filmmakers, actors, actresses, music directors were from Lahore who had been working in Bombay. When the partition happens in 1947, you have actually many people from Bombay who had been working there move to Lahore, and the film industry begins there. And but it doesn't really pick up very well until about 10 years later. In other words, in the first 10 years, there's a lot of, there are some films made, not a big number, and many of them are Punjabi films, but there are also some Urdu language films. But from after 10 years after partition, the number begins to pick up, and you have, if you will, the kind of the golden age, of Lahore cinema, which starts from about the mid 50s and lasts really until about the end of the 70s. Okay, so you have something like 25 years of kind of a film production, which is, and the numbers actually increased a lot, right? So by 1969, it was over 100 films that were being made, not just in Lahore, but also in Karachi, which emerged as a filmmaking center, and Dhaka as well, which was when Pakistan was composed of two wings, West Pakistan and East Pakistan. Dhaka had also emerged as a center for both Bengali filmmaking and Urdu language filmmaking. Okay, now after the 70s, there's a big decline in the number of Urdu films being made, and this has to do. There are three reasons for this, right? The reasons are, on the one hand, the first thing that happens is So one thing that happens is the arrival of the VCR. Okay, so once the VCR shows up, people begin to start to watch Indian films, Hindi language films and Bombay films on the VCR rather than go to the theater. Okay. The second thing that happens is that General Zia's regime comes to power, and he has strictures on kind of Islamization and on the showing of various themes, on the showing of women's bodies and faces and and so on, which puts a damper on many filmmaking kind of activities. And so what you have is a big decline that in Urdu language films that takes place from about 1980 onwards. Okay. Now, in the last 15 years or so, there's been a revival. Okay, so Zinda Bhaag is part of that revival. Okay, it should be seen as it's been characterized as new cinema. Okay, this filmmaking that really picks up from about 2007 onwards, right? And 2013 is when Zinda Bhaag was made, and that's a particularly important year because not just because Zinda Bhaag was released, but also because many other films were released that were the first of their kind in terms of genre or in terms of the kinds of the genre of films that were made. So so you have to think about this amnesia, okay, in Pakistan. Young people in Pakistan don't necessarily know the history of Pakistani film, and they may not even know the history of Indian films that well. I mean, some people may have watched the Indian golden era Indian films like the Raj Kapoor films and the Guru Dutt films, etc., as well as the later color films of Amitabh Bachchan. But they may not know the equivalent history of what happened in Pakistan. So this question of amnesia is an important issue, I think, that Zinda Bhaag deals with. But let's begin. So I'm going to start by asking a few questions to Meenu, and then we'll look at some clips and think about the film as well together. So Meenu, tell us why you and your collaborators decided to make this film.
When we were thinking of this film, one of the very urgent stories from around us, from our own family, was of somebody that had done what in the film is called the donkey. The donkey, as you know, is crossing over to Europe from South Asia illegally through the land route, and so this donkey, it's very, very prevalent, especially in Punjab. So both the Punjabs, Indian and Pakistani Punjab. So we had somebody from the family who had done this, and we had friends who had actually also done the donkey. And in one case, this friend had been deported and had returned. And what we felt was that it was so damaging to him, this entire story or this journey, etc. Because it's not just about how dangerous the journey is, but once you kind of cross over, there's no way you can go back to your family because you're illegal. And so, you are kind of separated from your family. It's a different life. So anyway, we were kind of thinking about these stories, but we also realized that there was this great sort of form of street lore, I don't know how else to say it, of tales of heroism and tales of failure, which were connected to this journey, of going abroad. So, X person did this and Y person did that. And they were really like modern day tales, of heroes or failures, either way. So then we realized that, here we are in Punjab, and, Punjab has its own folk tradition of, telling these heroic tales, whether it's it's called var, right? Something ki var means to tell heroic tales, or even kissas, which have a sort of fable like thing. So we wanted to tell the story, which was about heroism and failure, but a very, very contemporary story about immigration and young boys in Lahore and their feeling of being trapped. So these were the forces that were actually guiding us. And then, of course, as you know, I'm sure you'll talk more later and I can come in. I mean, there is a particular form in which we chose to tell the story. And that form is like from two different worlds. On one side, we have very, very realistic way of telling the story. We have non-professional actors. We use real locations. But then there is the song and certain tropes from our own folk traditions and our South Asian cinematic traditions that we have used. And I can later talk about why we chose that, that mode of storytelling.
Great. Okay, so let's look at a couple of clips. Okay, and then maybe talk about those. Huh? So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, and play the first clip. So we are going to play the opening sequence.
देखो जी सारे कहते ने कि जिन्ने लाहौर नहीं वेख्या वो जमया ही नहीं पर कुछ ये भी कहते जो लाहौर विच जमया है ओदे कोलों ते कदे दही भी नहीं जमया बेवकूफ ने सारे दसो रब दी ऐसी केड़ी नेमत है जो लाहौर विच नहीं फिर इन्ना सोना शहर छड़ के बाहर नहीं दौड़ते ने सारे यार तांबी पैर थले रख ऑफिस दी गड्डी इन्हें खालदी साहब हर काम विच शॉर्टकट समझते ने जिंदगी बदलन ਲਈ यूके दा वीजा मस्ट है ओए होए ते आ जेडी शॉपिंग करन निकले ए ऑफिस दी गड्डी ते नहीं तांबी उन्हें यूक्रेन तो डिपोर्ट होके आया है अपना ही बच्चा है मेरे भरोसे वाले कम शाम में वही करता है और किधर चाचा फोटो है चिट्टा गरीब करता सीधा साधा लड़का सोचता है इधर मेहनत करके भी इज्जत नहीं मिलनी सो फौरन दी ट्राई मारिए वो मुद्दा नहीं वो तो चाचा बुबैया ना फ्रांसी फोटो ऐसी आज खोल ले मटन के चिकन
Okay, so ideally this would make for a good discussion with if it is a class, but we are on Zoom, so so let me just point out a few things that I noticed about this is that it sets up so there's a voiceover. The voice of God, if you will, is actually the voice of one of the main characters of the film called the Pahalwan. The Pahalwan is, or the wrestler, or the toughie, okay, or the local boss is played actually by Nasiruddin Shah, the Indian actor, but the rest of the film has non-trained, kind of actors, right? And it sets up almost a kind of a touristic vision of Lahore at the beginning, right? The color, the food, the beauty of kind of life in the old city or in kind of traditional Lahore, and immediately disabuses it, right? But in the next sequence, you have an introduction to the three young men, the three main characters who are desperate to leave Lahore, right? Meenu, would you say something about the way this sequence is set up?
Well, it is, well, it's exactly what you actually said. The opening lines are what they're lines which are often used even in, traditions of theater, everything about Jinne Lahore nahi vekhya. The person who hasn't seen Lahore hasn't been born yet, right? These are such famous lines about Lahore that, everybody in India talks about it. And of course, there's a whole nostalgia about partition in there too, right? Because, um, uh, those who have actually of a generation seen Lahore, right? And then there's the next generations who will never see Lahore from India, I mean. So we wanted to kind of start with that romance, but then immediately sort of, complicate it with this joke, which, Nasiruddin Shah cracks about, the word Jamya in Punjabi means to be born, but can also be used as setting or something, that needs to set, as in yogurt or, anything that needs to become firm. So we play that on that word and, we make it into a joke, right? That the person who's born in Lahore, he's never actually himself ever sort of settled a set, which takes us into the question of illegal immigration and wanting to make it or wanting to be a success. Yeah.
So I think this brings up the question of humor and really a kind of black humor in the film, right? So, so you're tackling a pretty grim subject, which is, the thwarted lives of, of men really of a particular socio-economic class, okay, who find no opportunities within Lahore and within Pakistan. And you could have easily made a film which was, which stayed within a kind of a realist way of delineating their life. So, what does humor do for your? What does the kind of the black humor do for your filmmaking project in this case?
Well, the thing is that I think what we were really thinking about is that we wanted to tell a very everyday story. I know that word everyday is sort of used a lot, but how do you just tell our own stories, right? But at the same time, sometimes when you actually see these kind of realist stories being told, and I've watched them in festivals, there is a certain grimness, to the way those tales get told. And that is not my experience of life, or that is not my experience of, everyday life anywhere, because there's a certain kind of humor that that exists in the most dire situations, right? And as you said, black humor, etc. So we knew that, to tell this actually realistically, to actually make this a real story, right? We will have to incorporate that everyday humor, even if this is a very there's a pathos in the story, or there is a grimness or a darkness in the story. And yeah, so that's why we have humor, but also, that Lahori humor, which is called jugat or repartee, there's a way in which Lahori speak, which involves a lot of repartee and this kind of dialogue that is incorporated in our film, which came out of improvisations. So these were these young non-professional actors improvising. So yeah, that's how humor naturally got integrated into the film.
Mm-hmm. And there's a way in which you're also thinking about Punjabi Punjabi theater, urban theater, right? Which is actually very prevalent in Lahore, but nobody discusses it. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So a lot of the actors in the film are from Punjabi commercial theater, and we were very much, you're very right, we are very much aware of that tradition of stage theater in Punjab, where there are these kind of dissing jokes, like the kind that Pahalwan is cracking, and a humor that is actually making fun of yourself. And yeah, so that of course was a big influence.
Yeah. Okay, so another way to think about kind of realism is also to contrast Zinda Bhaag with the TV serials in Pakistan, because as many of you may know that that while the film industry declined after the 70s, the TV serials were actually very, continued to be made and continued to attract a very wide audience, right? In fact, in some ways, the most important media form of in Pakistan in the 80s and 90s and so on would not be the cinema, arguably, but would actually be the TV serials, where you look for, to see the viewership of and the kind of themes discussed. But the TV serials, you have a kind of a critique of the TV serial format. So let me play a couple of clips, okay, and then we can maybe talk about that. Okay, so just to set up this these clips, in the film there is a TV serial that Meenu and the other have created within Zinda Bhaag. It is called Auqat. Okay, we'll discuss the meaning of the word Auqat as well. But this is a TV serial that many characters are addicted to in the film itself. Okay, so let me play a couple of clips from Auqat, which is playing on TV in the film. Okay.
मारांगे तो फिर पीछे नहीं हटांगे तेरा गुजरा आराम तो ही रोंदा वापस आ गया सी चल चल लेफ्ट हो चल चल यार छड़ा इस बात में की बरसात है और क्या है तेरी तुमने एक सब स्टैंडर्ड मिडिल क्लास जाहिल कवार औरत से शादी कर ही ली है तो मेरे पास के लिए नहीं आए हो हेलो मुनीर
Okay, and the next clip.
अम्मी जी आप देख तो नहीं मैं अपना यूनिफॉर्म इस्त्री कर रही हूँ
हाथ से मनु
नहीं शेखर मेरे दिल में सिर्फ और सिर्फ मैं
ते ए की पे करता है मैं अपनी पहली बीवी ने फोन क्या करदा है तैनू नहीं पूछदी पोलो खेर है डिजाइनर का निशान है हाँ इतनी नवी बीवी तो बड़ी चंगी रब्बी पूछेगा ना मरदा बिस्मिल्लाह बिस्मिल्लाह वीजा की खबर अभी कल ही तो बताया आपको हाँ अच्छा अल्लाह खैर करेगा हुन ए मुर्गी वेख ना इतनी महंगी हो गई है कि 220 रुपए किलो है तौबा 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 मजेदार है ना साहबी मां आई सी अज 50,000 रुपया भेजा उन्हें उतली मंजिल ते कमरा पाउण लई ਅਸੀਂ ਤੇ ਸੋਚਿਆ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਤੂੰ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪੈਸੇ ਭੇਜ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੋਵੇਂਗਾ ਪਰ ਖੈਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਚੌਲ ਤੇ ਹੋਰ ਲੈ ਜਬੀ ਨੂੰ ਵੇਖਣ ਲਈ ਕੁਝ ਲੋਕ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਮੁੰਡਾ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੇ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਬੀਵੀ ਉਹਦੀ ਫੌਤ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਉਹਦੇ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਬੀਵੀ ਵਿੱਚ 2 ਬੱਚੇ ਨੇ ਕੀ की हाय हाय एक ना तेनू तेरे ड्रामे लेके बह जाने मैं क्या पुत्र थोड़ा बहुत जो कुछ कर
Okay, so a number of things are going on here. So these are two different clips from two different kind of moments in the film, and in which both of them you see Khaldi's home where Khaldi, one of the main characters in the film, where the mother is, and her friends are, and her sisters are watching Auqat. Okay, so Auqat has actually even the word itself has a certain kind of a charge. Maybe Meenu, why did you choose to call your satirical serial Auqat?
The thing is that when we researched this film very a lot. I mean, in the way that one would research documentary. This also is because we needed non-professional actors. We knew that from the start. So when we were actually talking to the young men of this area in Samnabad where we shot, And we say, so, why do you want to go abroad? Like, because obviously the conventional way of looking at it would be poverty, but that's not the case. As you can see in Khaldi's house and everything, it's not like there isn't food on the table or whatever. It's not dire sort of poverty in that sense. That is, they are poor, they are sort of struggling. But so it turned out that, this idea of living an honorable life or a life with dignity, for your future generations was very much being discussed. And the word aukat, as you know, is it's used in South Asia to let you know of your standing in society, right? And most often the word will come up when when you don't have a locus standi, as they would be, because of your caste, because of your income, because of, whatever, like status, basically your status in society. So it's such a thing that is thrown at you. And there's this deleted scene from Zinda Bhaag, actually, which was originally the opening scene, in which these three boys are arrested because they're carrying some hashish or something, just for personal use, and they end up in a police station. And the police cop starts asking them about their background. So you are, and your father is, and then he goes in. And the fourth guy, who's the absolute sidekick for these guys, who's just their assistant, turns out to be from the same caste as the police inspector. So he's immediately placed on the table and offered tea and everything. So like this kind of thing where you can it's not just about money, but how do you get this status in society, right? So that is why we chose Aukat, as the name of this TV serial. Yeah.
So there's other things going on. One is that the dialogue is particularly sadistic in Aukat, right? Which is about, one of the characters saying to the other, you married in substandard illiterate wife, for example, right? And but of course, it's about domestic dramas and about that's the universe of the characters. The other thing that strikes me is how there is a collapse between reality and television. Okay, in the second clip. So when Khaldi is eating his chicken biryani and his mother is heckling him to be a better breadwinner. Okay, the other, there is a confusion between the marriage proposal for his sister and the marriage being discussed in the TV serial, right? So this collapse of reality and to the degree that some of the characters cannot make out what's being discussed, whether it's in real life or whether it's in TV. So I think this is also a way in which you perhaps gesture to the pervasive influence of these television serials in Pakistan. And what's remarkable also is that Pahalwan is also addicted to these to Aukat, right? So it's not just Khaldi's mother, but also Pahalwan himself, the tough guy, who's also kind of never misses watching Aukat. And certainly Aukat, the word, as you explained, usually like in Urdu, even it's used to say, Tumhari Aukat kya hai? It's usually used as a way to challenge the status of your protagonist, okay? In a kind of a satirical way. It's, so it's an important word. The mother figure is also shown here as somebody who's berating Khaldi for not being a breadwinner, right? And to kind of underscoring his failures. How, so in some ways, this mother figure you draw also from the mother figure in golden age Indian and Pakistani cinema, where the mother figure was this endlessly self-sacrificing figure, right? But here the mother figure is not an endlessly self-sacrificing figure, but somebody who's actually goading on her son to and criticizing him for the failure for him to make a living. Can you speak about this transformation of the mother figure?
Yeah, so the thing is that, as I said, when I was introducing the film, that at one level, the film is in a dialogue with South Asian, Lollywood, Bollywood, but basically the big commercial films, and is trying to sort of overturn certain tropes, certain ideas, like for instance, if you see Punjabi films from the previous era, then those films are all about the hero fighting for honor, and winning that honor, like somehow. So the tale is very simple. So something like Maula Jat or those kind of, they're just all about this rivalry between two people, supposedly about an issue of honor, whether it's for the community or the caste or the individual, but you fight for that and you win it. And this film, and you have, the hero will always win. And in this film, if you see, that is exactly the same fight for honor, except that our heroes are grappling with failure up until the end, right? So so there's that dialogue going on about heroes of another era, and trying to turn those tales into an everyday tale. What would it actually be like, if we were telling our own stories? And similarly, the mother figure is always, the self-sacrificing and, whatever. So, however, I mean, I'm not saying that all mothers are like, like this or like that, but the fact remains that there are pressures on young men to make the lives of the families better, and on young women, and to marry better, to somehow use marriage, which is also going on in this story, to take, to help the family. So that's it. We just wanted to turn that idea of the mother on its head as well. And in terms of just Aukat, one more thing is that there's the whole matter of taste, which has I think it's in India and Pakistan as well, where our sort of folk traditions, are rejected by a certain class because they're seen as too bawdy, too vulgar, and in their place, there's a kind of a sense that these dramas have actually now catered to those middle classes or the upper middle classes, right? They are this sort of moral universes, which these classes think are more aligned, to their taste. And so there's also this thing, like the content, if you actually see, is always this triangle love story about two women and one man. So, like we're also trying to kind of draw that out, like in terms of what is being consumed, in terms of morality, if I make any sense.
Okay, great. So, and now let's come to the question of, sort of the, what I may call the neoliberal economy of Pakistan today, right? So in other words, one of the ways in which these young men find they have jobs, okay, but the jobs, they don't find the jobs to be meaningful. So let's play a little clip in which two of them are installing like internet cable or TV cable and they go into a kind of an upper class home. So let's watch that clip. So this clip is actually, while it's loading, I'll just speak. So this clip is actually, when they go in this home, they watch a gathering of women, essentially upper class women who are involved in Islamic reform, right?
देखिए बहनों, हमारी शनाख्त, हमारी आइडेंटिटी हॉरिजॉन्टल है. क्लास, नेम, प्लेस, ट्राइब, कंट्री. किधर है? क्लास. सॉरी बॉस. इसको अब हमने वर्टिकल करना है. डाउनवर्ड्स इज मी, अपवर्ड्स इज अल्लाह.
Iftikhar, We couldn't see that clip. I think we instead saw some other document.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry about, yeah. So
sorry.
I think maybe you...
Let me share. I think I forgot to share the screen. So, sorry about that.
देखिए बहनों, हमारी शनाख्त, हमारी आइडेंटिटी हॉरिजॉन्टल है.
क्लास,
नेम, प्लेस, ट्राइब, कंट्री.
किधर है? क्लास, सॉरी बॉस.
इसको अब हमने वर्टिकल करना है. डाउनवर्ड्स इज मी, अपवर्ड्स इज अल्लाह.
Okay, so in contrast to the this sense of identity that is actually being formed and among upper middle classes in Lahore, you also have kind of the sense of what might be called entrepreneurship among these young characters. So, of course, entrepreneurship is something that is lauded these days. We are all asked to be entrepreneurs, right? But what does entrepreneurship look like in at the level of the characters of Khaldi and so on? So let's look at a couple of clips that are kind of in a sense help us think about that. So let me share the screen again, and okay, the red dress. So this is the first clip is when Khaldi and his girlfriend go to a mall, the Mall of Lahore, which is a very kind of high-end mall with lots of kind of designer, stores, and they can't, of course, afford anything over there, right? So let's look at that exchange between them.
बस यार लाइफ में अब जल्दी सेट होना है. बस.
वैसे मेरे ख्याल से कोई भी अच्छी चीज जल्दी नहीं मिलती.
लेकिन यह वक्त भी तो हाथ नहीं आता.
सब्र का फल मीठा होता है.
और नाकामी के अंगूर खट्टे.
दूर के ढोल सुहाने.
सब कुएं के मेंढक यही कहते हैं.
हाँ, धोबी का कुत्ता ना घर का ना घाट का.
वो. उफ. आकर जानी.
बहुत महंगा.
बड़ा मजा आएगा.
अच्छा
वरना देखें.
Oh, Iftikhar.
नहीं करनी चाहिए. देखें उनकी बदनाम है.
Okay.
The video.
The video. Okay.
Oh,
sorry.
you forgot to share it, I think.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm really sorry. Okay.
बस यार लाइफ में अब जल्दी सेट होना है. बस.
वैसे मेरे ख्याल से कोई भी अच्छी चीज जल्दी नहीं मिलती.
लेकिन यह वक्त भी तो हाथ नहीं आता.
सब्र का फल मीठा होता है.
और नाकामी के अंगूर
दूर के ढोल सुहाने.
सब कुएं के मेंढक यही कहते हैं.
हाँ, धोबी का कुत्ता ना घर का ना घाट का.
वो.
You still can't see it, Iftikhar.
Oh, okay. Why?
You can't see it. No, I think you forgot to.
जल्दी सेट हो. बस.
वैसे मेरे ख्याल से कोई भी अच्छी चीज जल्दी नहीं मिलती.
लेकिन यह वक्त भी तो हाथ नहीं आता.
सब्र का फल मीठा होता है.
और नाकामी के अंगूर खट्टे.
दूर के ढोल सुहाने.
सब कुएं के मेंढक यही कहते हैं.
हाँ, धोबी का कुत्ता ना घर का ना घाट का.
वो. उफ. आकर जानी.
बहुत महंगा.
बड़ा मजा आएगा.
अच्छा
वरना देखें जी अब इंडिया को हमारे साथ दुश्मनी नहीं करनी चाहिए. देखें उनकी बदनाम है.
Okay, sorry about the screw-ups. Okay, so we see the aspiration for this, kind of this red dress, okay, by Rubina, which of course neither of them can afford, and which is also, prominently advertised, not just in the mall, but also outside. So thinking about really the world of Lahore today, if you go there, then this is actually the world with the really increased divides between kind of very high-end commodities being advertised on glossy billboards, etc., and sold in stores with prices that unaffordable to many of the people. But of course, this also fuels aspiration and desire, right? To the degree that that later on, Khaldi steals this dress from one of the houses he visits for the cable and gifts it to Rubina. But Rubina is also involved in entrepreneurship. So let's look at her entrepreneurship. Okay, so now I'll share the screen in advance. Okay, share. Okay.
डिलीवरी ले ले 25 का कार्टन है ओहो की 25 का कार्टन कुड़िए पिछले 25 दी ले जा और कोई नहीं खरीददा हद्दा बनया साबन आज 1500 का कार्टन है कल 3000 का हो जाएगा मेरी मां ने बाजा साहब रख लीजिए फायदे में रहेंगे बस
Okay, so you have Rubina making a homemade soap called Face Look, okay, and with using the same logo and scheme as Facebook, obviously, and then trying to, in a sense, market it to this to different stores and even in malls, right, as a way to kind of, in a sense, her own way of generating an income. But by the end of the film, you realize that Rubina is actually sincere in her entrepreneurship, where the men are involved in taking shortcuts. Okay, okay. So the question of masculinity is also an important one for this film, right? So Meenu, this film is really about a certain kind of a crisis of masculinity, right? So can you speak to that, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that when we were doing the research for this film and really just trying to explore this question, why would anybody, be ready to be killed to make this journey? Why all these boys sitting around listening to, as I said, the street law of heroism? And when you see the film, you'll see that the wrestler or Pehelwan, the character, he actually tells these 4 stories, which are like fables, which are about these heroic feats of individuals who've either made their life or due to one mistake destroyed their lives. So when we were listening to these stories, a lot of which are true in the stories that Pehelwan tells, true in the sense that we got it off from research, we realized that how much of it was really about, as I said, heroism and failure, who's going to fail and why do you fail and who's a hero and why somebody makes their life a success. And how this journey and getting to Europe and settling in the UK was becoming linked to this question of almost like, if you are a man, then you will take this risk and you will do this because, it's for the good of your family. So that was even when we were improvising the film, we realized how much of it was about this very actually fragile masculinity, of young men. And it had a lot of pathos, and it really was moving for us as filmmakers, to see how less of a conversation there was about how these men were feeling or how trapped they felt. So, and then it comes out in fairly ugly forms as well, so so we talk a lot about let's say violence, which is gender-based and everything, but on the other side is this this kind of really troubled masculinity as well, right? So towards the end of this film, you'll see how Rubina and Khaldi's relationship goes sour. It's only that Rubina is a very strong woman, so she doesn't stand for it, right? But as he's failing, how it actually comes out on the woman who is actually doing fine and who's a success. And the Rubina's character we were researching were actually women who worked in beauty salons in Lahore. And and there was that dynamic too, that they were successful, they were hardworking, they were kind of succeeding. And the men in their families, whether their boyfriends or their brothers, were necessarily not, and that sort of clash that was coming in that relationship.
Okay, great. So one of the let's look at a song now, which is the song called Dekhenge. So I'm going to play that clip. Okay. So the first thing I'll do is share the screen because I'm bad about that. Okay. All right, share, and then we can say wait. Okay, so let me set up this clip before playing it. One of the characters is working in the Punjab Imperial Club, which is an elite club, and one of the members' phone has been stolen, and he accuses the waiters of possibly having stolen his mobile phone. Of course, the waiters have not stolen it. It was actually one of his nephews or somebody who had run off with it. But the waiters are humiliated by the police and accused of theft. So that's one context. The other context is that there is a westernized kind of upper class crust woman who just loves Faiz Ahmad Faiz's poem, Hum Dekhenge, which is sung by Iqbal Bano. It's a very famous rendition of Faiz's poem, which is really a poem about socio-economic justice, right? It's a very beautiful poem about socio-economic justice. So this song and dance sequence we'll see is the riffs on both the humiliation that the waiters have just suffered, and also the reference to Faiz's Hum Dekhenge. So let me now start this clip.
Phone hi to hai? No, it's not just the phone. It's my email addresses, contacts, files, and all very valuable information. And it's lost.
I tell you, this has become so common in our country. Somebody has to do something. We are becoming a nation of fence sitters.
Game khel rahe hain, little sir. Oh, you little rascal!
शुक्र है फोन मिल गया है. This is so embarrassing.
Rafi, बहुत बिगड़ता जा.
Children, let's go back to the party. Here we go. Cotton.
I've told Mommy I'm sick of this lemonade business. I'm going to resign.
They put for a band if our family nominated one.
Somebody just called me a liberal fascist yesterday.
God says you're not a liberal.
Iftikhar तो तुमने पढ़ी होगी. चौसा तो मेरा फेवरेट है.
जब शाम खुलेगी देखेंगे, तब आंख खुलेगी देखेंगे. जब शाम खुलेगी देखेंगे, तब आंख खुलेगी देखेंगे. दिन ख्वाब ही ओढ़ गुजारेंगे, जब रात चलेगी देखेंगे. क्या हमको हक दिलवाएंगे, नस्लों पे हुक्म चलाएंगे. हमको हक दिलवाएंगे, नस्लों पे हुक्म चलाएंगे. जो अपना नहीं वो बेचेंगे, जो बीजा नहीं वो खाएंगे. जब शाम खुलेगी देखेंगे, तब आंख खुलेगी देखेंगे. दिन ख्वाब ही ओढ़ गुजारेंगे, जब रात चलेगी देखेंगे. देखेंगे भाई देखेंगे, देखेंगे भाई देखेंगे. लो नंगे नालो किले दे विच पलाट बना लो फरमाइश करो के फराट करा दो यस 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 मालो करा लो हो प्यारे नाने कोई नहीं करना प्यारे नाने कोई नहीं करना लाड करांगे लाड करा लो माथे तेरे झूमर चमके गाल है तेरे दम 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 के गाल है तेरे दम 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 के इधर भी थोड़ी नजरें करम हो आंखों में तेरी डालर चमके जब शाम खुलेगी देखेंगे तब आंख खुलेगी देखेंगे दिन ख्वाब ही ओढ़ गुजारेंगे जब रात चलेगी देखेंगे देखेंगे भाई देखेंगे देखेंगे भाई देखेंगे
So it's a very remarkable song, Meenu. You want to say something about how you know, how you conceived of this and what the song is meant to do?
It sort of is, the whole sequence is inspired by, something which we experienced as writers, filmmakers, producers, our entire team, but I'm sure many other people have experienced as well, which is, that you end up in what we call a nice mehfil or a party in Lahore, and you'll have a singer or, on record, the revolutionary poetry of, all of our sort of favorite poets, Faiz Ahmad Faiz, being played. And it's, just like maybe just a feet away or something, where will be a whole lot of really a whole workforce of very poor people who will be catering to this party, right? So so this could be private parties, but this could also be like a festival, like a literary festival or anything where this is happening, but just behind the scenes, just behind the what we call the shamiana, will be all these people, who will be catering. So he's such a revolutionary poet, and those words, they mean something, or they mean something, and yet in reality it's just being consumed at a very aesthetic level, so that's what we wanted. We definitely wanted this sequence in our film, and it kind of happened because part of our research always pointed, or we always heard stories about, you were talking about entrepreneurship, or what consumerism can do. So there were these stories which were being told a lot to us about how, there was the story this boy told us, that how he had collected this amount of money to go and buy a Levi's pair of jeans or something, and on the way back, he was stopped by this cop and really humiliated, and whatever, and he was like, I had Levi's on, but it didn't save me that humiliation or whatever. So yeah, that all that was playing into kind of this thing. This boy, he's in the film Chitta, he's supposedly from a more marginalized caste, and he's got this job and he's got a uniform, but look at the humiliation that he has to endeavor. So then we went to the novelist Mohammad Hanif, who's a friend of ours and who wrote A Case of Exploding Mangoes, and we said, look, we want to do this with this poetry of Faiz, and we want to have this sort of dialogue with it and all, and can you please write it for us? And he did it, he wrote it, and that's how the song happened.
So, but it's also a kind of a critical take on the item number form, right? So, in other words, that it's in a item number in films, you would have actually beautiful women, basically performing a gratuitously sexy dance, basically, right? And here you've taken that format, I think the item number format, and kind of, I think, twisted it to your own ends, okay? Where you have basically it's all men who dance, right? And not all of them are particularly telegenic, let's say, right? And also there is a kind of eroticism among the men as they perform the dance sequences, right? So that's, I think, important also to the kind of both the in a sense, the form of the item number and what you do with it. So again, a question that of a reflexivity that comes to me in this move, as well as the retake of Faiz, if you will, by Muhammad Hanif, right? So in other words, that Faiz's poem is really kind of a very beautiful poem. That Pal Bano rendition is a very famous and rendition, and yet it seems to have lost its critical force or something, right? By, as you mentioned, because it's kind of just consumed as background music or as a kind of a aesthetic, on an aesthetic level. And finally, I think the question of temporality is important here. The kind of the staccato editing, the kind of rapid fire editing as the song progresses would also be, I think, a critique of the TV serial format, because when we saw in Awqat and other TV serials that you can actually see on TV, TV has a certain kind of an aesthetic which has to do with high key lighting, frontal poses, stage dialogue, and a certain kind of temporality. And what you're suggesting with this clip, with this kind of a very rapid kind of temporal sequences that overwhelm really one's perception, is also perhaps a sense of the neoliberal present, right? With the kind of mediatized and globalized forces that wash upon us and that we struggle to kind of comprehend, it's I've received a reminder about time, which is now 12:10 almost. So Meenu, at this point, I mean, I did want to show just a couple of minutes of the Qawwali.
So I guess till people type in their questions, maybe, I mean, I can check with Amina, because as the questions get typed in, maybe we can show the last clip. Okay. So in the meantime, for the participants, if you have questions for, please type them in the Q&A box, and we will finish by discussing this another song, which is actually a Qawwali. So now I'm going to play the Qawwali.
रेशम दे लाचे ने लाचे ते कजरे ने साडी अखां दे नेड़े ने शाम की मुदे गुजरे ने डूंगा समुंदर इश्के दा डूंगा समुंदर इश्के दा जद मन विच ठाठा मारदा ठाठा मारदा डूंगा समुंदर इश्के दा जद मन विच ठाठा मारदा ठाठा मारदा फेर दसियां अखियां नूं दीदार सजन दा ठारदा फेर दसियां अखियां नूं दीदार सजन दा ठारदा नहीं मिलदा नहीं मिलदा नहीं मिलदा है पता यार.
So Meenu, can you say something about the making of this Qawwali?
Um, this is an odd qawwali in the sense, as you would have noticed, it's in Punjabi, right? And you know, the way that, I mean, I guess I could speak a little bit about why there are songs in my film, you know, because it's very odd for, I think, a lot of people to have a film where you have non-professional actors, location shooting, and this whole kind of, you know, really push to a limit realistic aesthetic. And then you have songs which you haven't yet seen the lip sync. I'm telling the participant, there's a lip sync song as well, right? So I mean, it's seen a very very odd sort of a choice. And the reason I think we made that choice very consciously, I've already spoken about, you know, the South Asian film form, our folk traditions in which there's kissa, and all of these traditions always have storytelling plus song, right? It's something that has been there in our form. And yet when, you know, filmmakers like myself actually who went to film school, etc., when we actually encounter world cinema or you know, certain realist cinema, which is very, very inspiring, but somehow you're kind of made to feel that these are like two poles, right? So either on one side you have the South Asian film form where you cannot tell real stories. You cannot tell real stories in that form. They are, and on the other side, that if you try to tell real stories, then you cannot have this form. You know, this is like a, unfortunately, nobody's actually told you that, but it's an assumption of sorts. Nonetheless, all of us as filmmakers who were involved in this film are very, very drawn to the folk traditions, not just theater, but also literary. And there is even in our writing, as we when we write our scripts, there is a big influence even in terms of structure. So for instance, this film is the opposite of a coming of age story. If you think about it generically, it's the exact opposite, because it has a circular structure. So it's not, as we are taught in film school, your 5-act structure, where you go from a position of unknowing to knowing, you know, which is the structure that we are taught in screenplay. You start with the protagonist who doesn't know, and then you go to a position of knowing. In this, as you know, Khaldi lands right in the middle of the same trap that he was always in. So it's quite circular in that way. So anyway, to cut a long sort of story about what we were trying to do, songs, we thought that, you know, how do you tell a realist everyday story? But because the Lollywood film form, the Bollywood film form, the South Asian film form, the folk film, folk traditions have had a way in which they enter our everyday lives where we actually cannot separate it from our lives. So whether it's marriages, whether it's funerals, you know, whether it's religious functions, these songs, this poetry, it comes into our lives. In fact, the way that we imagine certain life situations, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's just me who's like that, but I think there's a lot of us who actually relate moments from cinema. You know, what is friendship? What is love? What is betrayal? You know, these kind of notions we do carry from our cinema. So, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we wanted to do, that we don't want to separate the cinema, which is part of our life, our experience, everyday experience, the way we experience romance, the way we experience various things in our life. We want to bring it into the film and still tell an everyday story. So then what form would this music take? And that's why, you know, we had a qawwali at a moment where all our protagonists are trapped, they were trying to get out, but they find themselves. So this is traditionally how a qawwali would be used in cinema, you know, as an internal dialogue with the protagonist. So that's the story of the qawwali. Very long answer, I'm sorry.
No, we have some questions now. So shall I pose some questions for you, Meenu, from the questions that have been? So one is, can you elaborate on what you just said about not being able to tell real stories through the South Asian film form? So meaning, I think you explained that while the question was being typed, but I would say that for me, what I think Zinda Bhaag is doing in terms of genre is very important, because it's trying to, I think, it's trying to mine various genres, right? So it's on the one hand, you have realism if you will, in the encounters between the characters. But then you also have the, as I mentioned, the world of Awqat and the TV serial and that kind of fabling. What we couldn't see, unfortunately, due to lack of time, is actually the Pahalwan and his fabling, because that's a very important part of the film, where the Pahalwan tells these tales, right, about these moralistic tales. And those are four clips of 4 sequences of more than 8 minutes each, right? And so they form a very important part of Zinda Bhaag, which unfortunately we couldn't see. But in some ways, those are nested stories like you would have in a qissa or a dastan, right? In which you would have nested stories like that. And plus, the question of the song and its place in one's imagination. So what is realism? I think the larger question would be, what would be realism, if you will, in South Asian cinema, and what would be, or in other words, what is the most adequate way to narrate today's experience, and what cinematic and cultural forms will it take, right? And I think Zinda Bhaag is trying to answer that by saying it's the answer that the parallel cinema in India answered was it has to be realism. That was the answer from the 60s and 70s, right? And even from the days of Satyajit Ray all the way to the films like Nishant and so on. And I think the answer today has to be much more complicated, right? It has to also think about the question of, where does one's imagination, which is forged through all of these cultural references that include if you will, pre-modern references like the qissa, the dastan, but also the legacy of cinema itself, right? The item number, the song, and its relation to one's capacity to imagine the present, I think. Meenu, anything you want to add to that, or?
Sorry, I was on mute. No, I think you answered it really well. It is exactly what you just said. And I think that answers the question about what I mean. So like, it's just, if somebody endeavors to tell my story on screen, if that happens, then I would be absolutely devastated if it didn't have songs. I cannot imagine that, right? So that would be a lie. That would be a lie. It would not be just, it would be a lie. One of my grand aunts just, who doesn't like Bollywood and, all the song dance things, she's very, very, she's got very good taste, and, she makes it clear that she doesn't like this. So she sent me some religious song the other day, and I don't know how to break it to her, but it's actually, the music is a dance number from a Bollywood film. And and this is exactly what I mean, that, even in religious, and people who've been in South Asia, they know this, even religious rituals are not complete without the lyricism or the poetry, or even, I think Richard Dyer wrote a very interesting paper on it, how even everyday rituals and how we perform them, have a relationship. But more importantly, I'd say, okay, you can have a certain response to the South Asian film form and like or not like it, or, but also what about our folk traditions, which Bollywood and Lollywood and South Asian film form heavily engages with. So this sort of how do we continue to engage with those folk traditions is a big thing for me, and especially because we are talking about decolonization, and and we must talk about taste or class, and what's happened through a certain kind of colonial cultural education as well, and what has it led us to reject, etc. And I think there are more questions. There is one which says, what sort of reception questions have you gotten from audiences unfamiliar with the South Asian milieu? It's been, this film has been really traveled a lot internationally, and been theatrically released internationally and on international VOD platforms, everything. So it's got a wide international audience. And it's very interesting that, on many screenings we get, there was this lovely lady from Bulgaria who came, and she was really surprised she said, you know, this film that you made on these 3 boys, they are exactly the boys that I went to college with. So how, you know, how have you tapped into, you know, these kind of characters? So I just think that for a lot of countries in the world, there would be, this film would, I think people would relate to it and have related to it. So that's a kind of reception. I will, when I do my segment very soon on you know, the exercise, will tell you a little bit also about how it was received, or, you know, some interesting insights that I got about film festivals, curation and programming vis-a-vis this film, because it mixes up things so much, genre and realism with songs. So there were very interesting responses there from programmers and curators. Are we missing any questions, Iftikhar? Is there, because we have like 5 more.
How are we doing for time?
We have a good 5 minutes more.
All right.
Yeah.
So there's another question, which is, thank you for introducing this unique format for a masterclass. Could you please throw some light on the role of these aspects of the aspiring travelers, acceptance of their sexuality if relevant by themselves and by their society? And the second question is politics of food culture, especially what inspired its picturization in the kitchen song clip.
Okay, I can, you want me to answer that, Iftikhar?
Yeah.
So, you know, I think I'll just draw upon the point that Iftikhar was mentioning about the, you know, the item, what is called the item song, or the woman dancing. And especially, again, because we are in dialogue with Punjabi cinema of a certain era, then if you're familiar with those films, and you'll say it's always the woman dancing, and it's always the man who's the observer or who's watching, who's the audience of this dance. So we haven't seen that song, but in the first song, actually, Khaldi and Rubina, they replicate what is called the mujra, or the item, whatever you want to call it. They replicate exactly those dance steps, but except that Khaldi does all the sort of really, you know, the moves of, you know, that are usually reserved for the female dancer. And again, this was coming from this notion of a constructed masculinity through our cinema, in which, you know, the man has to be, you know, sort of very strong, and this woman has to be, you know, dancing and seducing and etc. So we just wanted again to turn that on its head and have these. Wanted to have dancing men, a lot of dancing men in the film, and then not change the dance moves, still have the same moves, you know, that traditional mujra. So there's that kind of exploration of a different kind of masculinity and a different kind of femininity in the film that is very, very conscious in the film. And about the food, what was the food?
Food is, what are the politics of food culture, especially in the kitchens song?
I don't know exactly what that means. You could clarify, but, you know, like we did try to, you know, use the food in, to show the wastage, you know, so there's this lot of thing about consumption and wastage in the kitchen that is continuously being shown through certain symbolic clips. Yeah, I think consumption and, you know, this sort of this upper elite society, which is consuming and throwing and using, right? And to kind of check the morality of that, in a sense, also. So that's very much part of that sequence.
We have a comment from someone who says that, just to add to the conversation, in India, Bollywood songs are taken up and played loudly in public during religious festivals. Local performers sing them in religious functions. So this, I think, adds to the comment, Meenu, you made about your aunt sending you these songs, right? Yeah, so.
As there's a question about the availability of the film on SOAS website, I know it's available in the SOAS library, and I know that there's going to be a screening of the film very soon in November. I think it's a project with the Decolonizing Screen World project. I think it's going to be on 25th November, so I'd suggest looking out for it. And yeah, so just look out for that date, and there'll be a link sent out, and you can access the film and watch it. That'll be great if some of you are interested in that. If we more or less covered our questions, and we can do some later when we have some. I just don't want to. I want to start the exercise bit of the class. Now, obviously, we are a very large group, and we have limited time. So keeping that in mind, I thought of a very short sort of a visual exercise, which also kind of is also sort of linked to my own thinking about my practice in a way. So with Zinda Bhaag, somebody asked about the international reception. I had a very interesting sort of an incident where in a film festival, I noticed that a particular very important curator, programmer from the UK had started to watch my film, but stopped watching it about, on the 7th or 8th minute mark. So I was like a little disappointed, and I had the chance to just be sitting next to them during dinner. So I asked him, her, I will not reveal who it is. So I asked them why they had stopped watching my film on the 7th minute. And she very honestly told me that, comedies from your part of the world, they do not travel to the UK, meaning that comedies from, Pakistan or India do not travel. Firstly, I was really alarmed because I hadn't seen my film so far as a comedy ever. And there was, but then, when I thought about it, and as Iftikhar said, that in just trying to capture the realistic sort of camaraderie of these three men, there's a lot of humor and everything, but it's very black humor. And then the film's got a lot of pathos and whatever. It gets quite sort of grim also towards the end. So that made me think about, how there are certain layers and nuances and a certain context that we as filmmakers from the non-West always struggle to convey fully. And the subtitle never quite can capture that. And that led to a lot of sort of me thinking about it. And I started keeping this sort of archive of clips from films from our part of the world. It didn't matter. It could be from Japan, it could be from India, where I felt, a filmmaker had sort of done something within the film with minimal dialogues and minimum need for, in that sense, translation through language, because language is a barrier, if when you're showing your films in an international context, right? Because you're relying on the subtitle. So I'm going to show you one such clip, which probably all of you would know about, and then we can discuss it. It's from Satyajit Ray's Pather Panchali. Let me screen share. You can see my screen, right? If not, please put something in the chat, and I'm going to start playing this.
কোথায় গেলাম রে? ওগুলো কি রে? মা যদি
Okay. Okay, so I'm sure many of you have seen this clip before. And like I said, it just doesn't need any subtitles, so I didn't put any subtitles there. And it just says so much, right? There's sort of, obviously, sort of man versus nature, and but also the past versus the future. The village, the city versus city, pastoral life versus industrialized, modernized life. There's so much going on in that clip, poverty versus development. And if you know the film, then you know how it also forms like a core sort of meaning within the whole film to to kind of communicate to its audiences what this film is really about, in a sense. So I showed this clip because I just want to lead you into an exercise in which you are able to think in this mode of something versus something, right? And how you can juxtapose these two elements visually within the same image. Even in a still photograph, you must have sort of seen that in various, maybe sort of even been taught that in classes. But this kind of essentially a juxtaposing of two different images, which when seen together creates an altogether third meaning, a comment, and a subtext. And while I don't sort of don't like to get into this whole debate of where this happened first in the history of cinema, because our cinema from our part of the world, our literary traditions, our poetry, the kind of work or the kind of research in it, is not, I think it's not to the point where one can, can sort of can challenge that, that actually certain modes of storytelling may have existed. And there's no research at all about, if there's ever been influence of these literary theater or cinematic traditions. And there's been any sort of if things have flowed in the opposite direction from the non-West to the West. So in that debate, I don't like to get into first, but of course, I cannot not tell you about how the Russian montage theorists were also thinking about this way of looking at images through juxtaposition. And in particular, you may have come across this name called Kuleshov, and he's known for this effect or this experiment called the Kuleshov Effect. Now, what Kuleshov did was that he took two shots, and in which the first shot in this experiment always remained the same, which was this actor and his very sort of deadpan face. And against that, he changed the second shot in 3 different scenarios. And this juxtaposition in which shot A remains the same and shot B keeps changing actually ended up producing 3 different meanings for audiences. So they took it to different audiences, and for one, people said, oh, he's feeling sad, and the other people said, oh, he's feeling lustful, or he's feeling hungry. So the meaning of this very deadpan and same shot, which is shot A, actually changed because of what it was juxtaposed with. So I'm going to show you the Kuleshov effect for you to understand it better. Have I shared? Yeah. All right. So very simply, this is what's going on there, which is where shot A remains the same. So that was the same shot in every scenario. And then you have a coffin, you have a plate of food, and you have this woman. And therefore, the coming together of these two shots has changed the meaning, right? That was the experiment. And this has become now, like, this is used widely in filmmaking. But I'm just giving you different iterations of this idea of kind of what I'm calling verses, you know, in the case of the Ray clip, that, you know, there's a way in which you can think visually in this sort of in this opposing or juxtaposing way, which can create very, very, very rich meaning. And I have one more clip to show you how, you know, Hitchcock, a lot of people will say, oh, you know, this is done by Hitchcock a lot, but, you know, it didn't originate. I mean, I don't want to get into that question, so forget about originate, but yeah, he's used it a lot. And this is actually the exercise I'd like you to attempt, which is that try and use one or two stills to do this. And the reason I'm suggesting stills is because to start, it will be easier to work with stills. It will be faster as well. And you can either within the same frame or the same image, juxtapose two elements to create this deeper sort of meaning, as we saw in the case of Ray. Or you can actually just try the Kuleshov effect for yourself, where you keep one shot constant, which is shot A, and you change your second shot and you see what changes. So, you know, like really sort of lame sort of example of this would be if you if you got let's say something off the internet, which was an image of the palaces of Westminster, you know, all lit up at night, or really looking colorful and touristy and festive. And in the first case, you put an image of a woman sitting and looking, you know, in silhouette or something on a bed, right? And I'd probably see those together and say, oh, you know, look at this festive happening city, and this woman's, you know, so lonely and whatever. Now, if I kept the same shot of the same palaces of Westminster, etc., and I changed the second shot, and I chose something like, you know, rats in a really dingy spot or something. And then, you know, you'd say, oh no, all's not good, you know, in the palaces of Westminster, there's a decay that has been set in, or, you know, whatever. So that's how this works. And I think I would like to get questions, because it's very important for, you know, if you've not actually got what I'm suggesting, then it's great if we can sort of clarify that in the question and answers Q&A box, and I could then elaborate. And so while you type your questions in, I just say, you know, you can be as general or take as large a theme as you would want to in this case. You can be as ambitious, you can be as simple. It doesn't matter. It's about just getting this idea clear that there is a way of using visuals and placing visuals in relationship to each other, which creates a deep subtext and great meaning in cinema. And not everything needs to be done through dialogue. So yeah, and I could show you in the case that we, am I missing a question? Let me just quickly go through. No, I think it's fine. So in which case I could just show you the Hitchcock. Please ask me questions. This exercise is going to happen after we sign off from here. So it's best that if there's any clarification that you need to do this on your own, you seek it right now. Okay, let's watch Hitchcock.
Now, the third way is what one might call pure cinematics, the assembly of film, and how it can be changed to create a different idea. Now, we have a close-up. Let me show what he sees. Let's assume he saw a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now we cut back to his reaction to what he sees. And he smiles. Now, what is he as a character? He's a kindly man. He's sympathetic. Now, let's take the middle piece of film away, the woman with the child, but leave his two pieces of film as they were. Now we'll put in a piece of film of a girl in a bikini. He looks, girl in a bikini, he smiles. What is he now? The dirty old man. He's no longer the benign gentleman who loves babies. That's the difference. That's what film can do for you.
Or you for it, as it were.
Okay, so I think I'll take some of the older questions, as I don't see that there are any questions about clarifying the exercise. Well, one thing we could do is, if for those who are willing to try this exercise today, you could take images off the internet to do it. Once you have your ideas ready, you can look for photos on the internet, since it's just for your personal use, and try and do this exercise. If you are somebody who has a great archive of photographs, you could dig into that. If you want to actually from scratch take a photograph for this exercise, you could do that. But for those who work with stills and are able to do this today, I'm happy to give the first 15 to 20 people feedback if they can email it to me. And I'm just saying that, just if you're able to send it today and do that. So I can put in my email address on, where should I put it? On the Q&A or on the chat? Amina, how should I do it?
Sorry, I just said chat box, please. I think everyone is on there. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
There's one question at the bottom of the Q&A as well, just asking for some clarity.
Okay. Of the Q&A box, right?
Yeah, that's right. There's a question by Ishita Shah right at the end. If you could repeat your explanation for the effect 1 used by Ray in comparison to effect 2 by Kuleshov.
Okay, so you can send your stills, okay, because this won't be able to carry any video files or anything like that. You can send me your stills and your exercise here. Today, so the first 15 to 20 people who are able to send it to me today, I will reply and get with some feedback. All right, so the explanation. I think at the core of both the ideas is this idea of, as I said, to simplify, this idea of something versus something, like thematically, right? So in the race case, there is this obvious, the train symbolizes a certain industrialization, modernization, development. And the pastoral, when Durga comes into the scene, she first is looking at all the power grids and the power lines and everything. And that's the first sort of shot that you see of her. And this is new to the village. This development is new to the village. And there's this poverty, which, the film is all about. So what is happening in the scene is that these two things are being juxtaposed deliberately together to provide the subtext. In the Kuleshov Effect, which is another experiment, the Russian montage theorists were basically saying that meaning in cinema is created through juxtaposition and not continuity. So the Hollywood style is something that is based on continuity, right? While the Russian montage theorists were saying that it's a juxtaposition of two shots against each other, which creates meaning. So to do that, to prove that, they did this experiment where they kept one shot constant and replaced the second shot. And then they said, see, you see that it's the same first shot, but the meaning of that first shot is changing because this man is holding the same expression. It's not changed. It's the same shot. But in one case, people think that he is lustful. In another, they think he's, he has this sorrowful about the loss of his child. In another, he's hungry. While actually, it's the same expression. So that is what the two ideas are. But for you, as to attempt this exercise, it's really just somehow either doing the Kuleshov effect for yourselves to see this, how this works, this juxtaposition, you could do that. Or if you had a general theme or something that you wanted to work on and see how within the same image, can you create a relationship between two things within the same image or in two separate images, that creates the third meaning, which creates, in Ray's case, as I said, pastoral versus, train. The train becomes the verses. I hope that's clear. Or you could continue asking. We have time. We have 8 minutes. So you could ask me another question. And send in your stuff, and I'd love to look at it and write. I think there was a question in which somebody asked whether, how do we select stories, which are what films end up becoming, the films that we choose to work on. I think, there's a lot that goes on, there's, it's not all down to your own choice. There's also contingency that one must factor in. Filmmaking is a very, very huge sort of enterprise and, requires funding, etc. So it also depends on all those factors falling into place. I think maybe your first film is probably one where you have that kind of clear choice that this is what you want to make and this is going to be the film you make. And then after that, I think there are other factors that come into place. But I think there's always a sort of a compelling story, a story that is kind of being formed continuously in your head. And you put it to paper, and that's the essential first step, to have that story on paper. And yeah.
Okay, so can I just ask a question and actually add my thanks to both you and Iftikhar for such a wonderfully informative and really varied masterclass, because when we were talking about the format and Meenu was, we'd originally kind of thought about this as a script editing session, but then when I had a conversation with Meenu and we were talking about the overall theme of the Festival of Decolonizing Knowledge, that sort of format changed to the format that you've had today. And I think that is so important for us to understand a practice of storytelling and filmmaking in terms of how you have adapted it and adjusted it, and also not really adapted it, but also introduced that sort of South Asian cinematic tradition back into the networks, to the global networks that you're a part of and you're making this a part of. And I suppose one of the question I just wanted to ask was about what are the challenges for a director setting off now, or a young director, with very little money, very little resources, what kind of film do you make? The film you're passionate about, or do you make the film that's going to be a commercial success? And what's the story that's going to work?
I think, Amina, this is, such a, I think your first film in that way is probably always going to be your most courageous effort, because at that time you actually don't know much about, how this whole industry or the world or everything functions. You just do it because you're driven and you are sort of, you want to tell the story, and, you go out there and try to look for resources. And then I think after that, it actually, rather than getting simpler, gets tougher because then the question comes up that, do you actually want to find sustainability through this profession? As in, is it your career that's also going to sustain you? And if that's not a problem for you, and if, you do not need to sustain yourself from the career, then I think there's some simpler answers there. Then you can keep doing your passion projects and keep, spending the kind of years it takes to get a film that is just your passion project of the. Otherwise, you need to be a little practical, I think, and say, okay, there will be my passion projects, which will take about 5 to 6 years, sometimes more, to find funding, to get off, and they'll be very satisfying. And that's what I'm really working towards. But between this time, let me do something that is, not my passion project, but, it helps me sustain myself, because I think that too many filmmakers, it's very unfortunate. And I mean, especially if you're an independent filmmaker like myself, you're always on this brink of almost giving up the career, because it's sort of not being able to sustain you. And there are many filmmakers, very, very brilliant, who just can't sustain it, and then they just, so I feel that there should be a balance, because you shouldn't break at any point and say, hey, I can't afford to be a filmmaker anymore. I need to do. So I think you do your passion projects and then just do something that helps you sustain.
Great, thank you. So basically, from idea to production to the film, is that like the timeline? Are we saying a 5-year timeline is a process that you're looking at? Because there's so many parts to filmmaking. I mean, if I'm just writing my own book, that can also take 5 years for whatever, but at least the parts to it don't have to be orchestrated in quite the same way as in your case. So how would you describe that process?
I mean, I think sometimes it can be very long if you get into the formal fundraising structures of, let's say, a co-production, let's say between a country in Europe and UK. That usually is a cycle of 3 years, if not more. And just to how the system works, just that takes time. But if you are kind of being more maverick in your methods of raising money, the way we were with Zinda Bhaag, it can happen very quickly. And it happened very quickly for us in Zinda Bhaag. But that's also because, as I said, we didn't know any better. And we were not, in a way, within the formal, we weren't going through the formal sort of industry routes so it's really down to chance, I think. In our case, what happened was that there was a great project that was wanting to commission us on a certain theme, a documentary. And we asked them, would they mind if we use their money as seed money for this film, feature film, and it's the same theme, etc. And they said yes. So that started the process, and we just went on.
Okay. So is it possible to ask you what the sort of, how much money it took to make, how much seed money does it cost?
I mean, it can cost anything, right? I mean, it's also how much, I mean, we always say in Zinda Bhaag that if we were given that pot of money now, we would be able to do so much more with it, right? Because it's that kind of management is also something you learn through experience, right? So it wasn't much money, but I feel that with experience, we may have managed that better, and, we may have whatever. So, I mean, independent films, they have made, as you hear stories about somebody making a really amazing film on an iPhone nowadays, right? So things have gotten simpler. And I think VOD platforms like YouTube, where you can put up your own content. They have made life simple. So I don't know if I mean, it's easy to say, but I do think it's possible to attempt a film on much less, much smaller pot of money than it was even in 2013 when we were making Zinda Bhaag.
Yeah, I think that's a really important observation, especially as we're in a time of COVID and the pandemic, and the cinemas are not operating, as far as I know, in South Asia or in other parts of the world. You know, major sort of film companies are not releasing their films. So for cinema, these are very tough times. And in terms of that sort of commercial cinema project, so the kinds of cinema that you're talking about, especially with the enabling of those different formats, perhaps we're looking at a different evolution of cinema even as we go forward into the future. Anyway, we're just at the end. We've got 2 minutes left, so I think we can let our wonderful panelists for this masterclass off the hook. Thank you very much to both of you for an invigorating, energizing, and informative session. It's been a treat. I've learned so much. I think everyone here will join me in thanking you, and we hope that we'll have an opportunity to welcome you back again. So thank you.
Thank you, Meena. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Iftikhar. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
And thanks to Sunil as well, who's been quietly in the background, making everything work. Thank you, Sunil, for being the tech moderator.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.